Aloha, everybody. My name is Shelby Morrison, and I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator at Ikahi Mediation Center. Welcome to our Finding Solutions Growing Peace Brown Bag Lunch series. Ikahi is a nonprofit community mediation center serving East Hawaii. We were founded in 1983 as a program of the island of Hawaii's YMCA, and in 2006, we became our own independent nonprofit. We empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options, and to find their own best solutions. To achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and trainings just like this one to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Our Brown Bag Lunch series is held every third Thursday at 12 noon here on Zoom. You have to register on Eventbrite each time to make sure you receive that Zoom link. Some other exciting events we have coming up is on February 19th, we will be having retired hostage negotiator Robert Cravallo, and his talk is titled Managing Conflict to Resolution. You can go ahead and register for that as usual through our Eventbrite link, which is in the chat. In addition, our conflict prevention and resolution training series will be having another session on February 5th with Eric Smith and Athena Liu with their workshop titled Master of the Storm, Navigating Misunderstanding, Disagreement, Even Conflict. The investment is $50 with group discounts and needs-based scholarships available. It will be held at the University of Hilo in room UCB 127 from 8:30 to 12:30. And you can register for that in the link that I will also be putting in the chat. Our next basic mediation training is also getting ready to start up, and that will begin on March 13th. This 4-day training is how our professionally trained volunteer mediators get their start. These fabulous folks donate their time to help community members communicate, negotiate, and resolve disputes. We're also always looking for additional community members to learn conflict prevention and resolution skills, and then consider joining our mediator apprenticeship program. So more details can be found on our website if you're interested in becoming a mediator for us. At the end of today's talk, we will ask you to fill out a short online survey, which helps with our grant funding for this free series. So when I put the survey link in the chat at the end of today's talk, please just take a quick moment to give us your thoughts. I'll also be sending out an email tomorrow with the slides, the video link, and that survey link once more. So without further ado, let me introduce our topic, Robert Rules, your procedural pathway to better board meetings. And our speaker is Jon Henricks, who serves as the County Clerk for the County of Hawaiʻi. Part of his duties include providing parliamentary guidance and support during meetings of the Hawaiʻi County Council. Henricks has worked at the Office of the County Clerk for just over 20 years, serving as County Clerk since 2018. He was born and raised in Hilo and graduated class of 1991 from Hilo High School. Take it away, Jon.
Oh, thanks so much. Thank you, Shelby, for that great introduction. And thank you also for meeting up early with me today so I can do my best to navigate this world of technology I'm not quite familiar with. And I also saw Julie on there too, Mitchell from Ikahi, who I haven't seen in a while. So nice to see you there too, Julie. I just want to first of all thank Ikahi Mediation Center for reaching out to me to provide this presentation today. Not knowing who we really never know who our audience is, I really focus in, I'm trying to find a way to share information that it doesn't take too much a deep dive into the weeds, but also isn't so basic that it's not a good use of your time. Because, like this is the book right here, Robert's Rules. And as you can see, it's quite hefty. It's not cheap. It's quite valuable, but you could spend years trying to learn all of this. So again, that was my goal today, not really knowing the audience. And when I attend presentations like this, what I really feel comfortable with is if I just quote unquote walk away, just knowing maybe 2 or 3 really things that change how I operate in the future, that's a success for me. So that's kind of my goal for everybody here today is if you can just walk away with 2 or 3 either simple, basic, or even maybe nuanced things that just assist you either in the work you do or understanding the work that other people do, then mission accomplished. Is this a good time to start sharing my screen, Shelby?
Absolutely.
Okay, we worked on this a lot. Again, this is not something I'm used to, so here it goes. How did I do?
Perfect.
All right, so then we're good to go. So we can skip this first slide, is a title slide, if you will, and delve into the next slide, which already tells you what you know, that I am the County Clerk. Thank you for that introduction for the County of Hawaiʻi. I've been doing this for a long time. I am also a member in good standing of the National Association of Parliamentarians. What does that mean? It means that I received some training. I took a test that I barely passed because it was very hard. And it also means that I've been paying my dues regularly, which makes me a member in good standing. I bring this up not just to establish credentials, which, that can be seen as good or bad, but more importantly, because again, not knowing exactly how each of you that's taking your time, which I'm thankful for, to join me today, join us today, not knowing exactly what your needs are, and what kind of boards you or committees or nonprofits or groups you interact with, that I received some training and preparation to take the test to be a member in good standing of the National Association of Parliamentarians from Dr. William Pewitt, who is located on Oahu, and he's the man when it comes to parliamentarian knowledge, expertise. He has all of the real credentials, if you will, that really can take deep dive down. He's worked with numerous different types of organizations, boards, be they corporate, nonprofit, homeowners associations, the whole gamut. Whereas my practical and professional experience is really relegated to helping the Hawaiʻi County Council navigate through its council meetings and committee meetings. So I put his name out there. His last name is spelled P-U-E-T-T-E, pronounced Pewitt. I'm not putting anything in the chat section, anything about contact, because I didn't contact him before. Sam's going to talk about him. So if you can find him, I'm sure he'll be helpful to you in whatever way he can, because he is very helpful to us, and he's very passionate about this field. So I wanted to give a recognition to him as somebody in our community that's been doing this for a long time for all the right reasons. So with no further ado, I will jump ahead and tell you what our agenda is for the day. And again, I'm really trying to keep things simple, quite frankly, in everything that we do as far as work here, my life, my family. I'm a kind of like keep it simple, get it done, achieve your successes. So our agenda for today is 4 things really, and they're very truncated. First one says have one, and that's just referring to an agenda itself, trying to be a little cute there. The second thing we're going to talk about today is the importance and what it takes to be a meeting manager, which could also be described as your chair of your meeting. And then the last 2 things are things you should always do. And then the last thing we're going to talk about are things that you should never do, with that in mind. So, and again, as Shelby mentioned, if there are questions, I'm more than welcome. I appreciate interactivity. So if things come up as I'm talking, whatever way is comfortable to get that through, please feel free. If not, we'll have time at the end to talk story. So let's jump in. This may seem patently obvious and kind of basic, and it's not meant to be condescending for all of you out there that do these things, but it's so important to establish a clear agenda for each meeting you're going to have. And I break this segment down into 3 kind of components where it's putting it in writing. Well, naturally, it's kind of hard having an agenda in your head, so we'll kind of delve into what does it mean to be putting in writing and some nuances there. And then the second topic within having a clear agenda for your meetings is the concept of the specificity of your agenda items versus providing more leeway. And the third component of having a clear agenda, establishing one, is to honor that agenda that you've created. So first and foremost, when we talk about putting an agenda in writing, why is it so important? Your agenda for your meeting is going to set these necessary parameters. What it will do then is create limitations, healthy limitations, not restrictions as you might see them, but healthy limitations, and establish expectations for what's going to be done that day. And really your agenda, it is your roadmap for your ultimate destination when the meeting adjourns, that you feel like, yes, we got from point A at least to point B, if not to Z, if that was the goal. But by putting it in writing, You're going to, again, establish these healthy parameters about what is expected to happen that day. And again, map your destination to what will then be determined, hopefully by all parties, regardless of the outcomes, as a successful business meeting. Because again, whatever kind of meeting you're having, whether it's a legislative meeting, a corporate meeting, a nonprofit meeting, a homeowners association meeting, these are all business meetings, and it's important to think of them that way. The second most important part about having an agenda and putting it in writing and making sure it's a good, solid agenda is that it ensures a very focused operation. When you have a solid agenda, what it does is it tells people what you're going to do that day and why you're there. If it's properly drafted, it's clear, it's concise, it's very thoughtful and deliberate. Again, it'll tell people what you're going to do that day and why you're there, your purpose. You can actually see the purpose of why you exist, and then that might even garner interest in what you do. And maybe more importantly, sometimes with things, if you have a very clear agenda, it will tell people what you can't do and who you are not, because that can be problematic sometimes in meetings when people have expectations of what's going to happen that day and what they want the board to do. Even some of the membership on the board may have some expectations or hopes or optimism that something can happen, but a properly drafted agenda will help to, kind of provide, again, healthy restrictions on what you can't do that day and who you are not, what the purposes you're not there for. Again, and more importantly, maybe most importantly, if not, is that what an agenda does is that it informs in advance of a purpose of the meeting. Of course, for the people who are there to, actually actively participate, your membership of your board or your committee or your association, but also other people who may be interested, whether they're actual stakeholders, like in a homeowners association, or shareholders, or if they're the general public, because you're the kind of board or commission that invites the general public to attend and to participate and to share in that experience. The agenda informs these things in advance, again, for the membership and for the people. When it comes to how you craft your agenda, there's a concept of how specific you want to be versus how broad you want to be. And your agenda, barring, of course, the important things like telling people, hey, this meeting is on this day, it's going to be at this time, and it's going to be at this location. And then, of course, in these days and ages, here's the Zoom link or the other types of video conferencing links, how to get in, here's a password, here's how you can join us. Those are all very important things. But the most important things on your agenda are your agenda items. And really what that is simply it's a list of things to do. It is your order of business, so to speak, because again, these are business meetings. There's really kind of two things you look at when you're setting out your agenda items. How specific do you want to be when you write them in there and you say, hey, item 1 is X. How specific do you want to be? When you're specific, it's necessary sometimes to do so because that'll set clear parameters that create a focused deliberation, not a discussion. We'll talk about that later. It creates a focused deliberation for your board and will help to provide for a definitive outcome if that's what you're seeking. It also helps with specificity if you're taking testimony, either from the public or from people who, again, are stakeholders, if you will, within your organization. The more specific you are with your agenda items, again, it sets those parameters for the board, but also people that have come to participate and help the board by providing input that the board or association or committee can then use in its deliberations to help inform the board more than it has on its own accord. So that's one angle, to be very specific. The other angle on an agenda item is when you aren't sure yet if you're ready to set the stage for a definitive, clear, decisive outcome, is to write your agenda item with more broader terms that allow for more expansive discussion and exploration for potential. That is another way to do things. Discussion for something, something, something. that then it's clear to those who are in attendance and the board members in advance that it is not anticipated that any concrete decisions are going to be made this day. We're not there yet, but this is the topic, and this is the, what we're here to discuss about where we can go with this, or if it's something that we don't want to entertain as a board, commission, or association. But really anything between those two things, the specificity and leeway, is not really anything at all is to be avoided. Last really thing with your agenda is to honor it, obviously. You took the time to create it. You took the time to post it. You took a lot of effort to put these things in writing and hopefully be very clear on what you're there to do. So honor it. Don't add items to it. That it only can and should be done in a crisis. And it also could be illegal. If you're a board that is subject to the Sunshine Law in Hawaii, Chapter 92, you can only add items to your agenda under very, very unusual circumstances. It really has to be an emergency. And that is very atypical and shouldn't be done unless absolutely necessary. But even if you're not a board or committee that is subject to the Sunshine Law, it could be in your bylaws or in your charter that your agendas essentially are set for the day. So really don't add items to your agenda. It can also be seen as somewhat nefarious, even when it's not, that you really didn't give advance notice of why you're there to meet. And conversely, don't avoid items. If you've included items on your agenda that day, go through them, dispose of them all, either through formal motions, by coming to conclusions, or postponing items to another meeting if you're unready to act on those items yet. But the main thing is you said, hey, this is the map for the day. We're going to connect all these dots and we're going to get through them all. So honor your agenda by keeping it as to what it is before you start it and getting through everything on that agenda before you adjourn the meeting. Quick water break for me. Cheers. I forgot to mention too, I wanted to, at the beginning, share a little bit more about myself than what Shelby shared, just to be fair, since you spending your time with me. Things I like are the National Football League, I like cats, and I like vinyl records from the 70s and 80s. So just throwing that out there, and you may see some of these things come throughout the conversation. So just a little bit of personal things about me. Cheers. Our second topic that we want to talk about in ensuring that we have solid, sound meetings is what is really critical is your meeting manager, or what we would call the chair of your meeting. We're going to break this down into three simple categories: is selecting and supporting that meeting manager, that chair, the desired qualities you want to look for in a meeting manager chair, and what the chair can do and what the chair can't do. And I'm going to, again, state, we could talk probably for 3 or 4 hours if we really needed to about chairs. So again, I'm trying to just keep things not superficial, but basic and clear and hopefully helpful, things that aren't too nuanced so that they can really be embedded and be absorbed and will resonate with you. So first and foremost, select and support a meeting chair. You want to elect a long-term meeting manager or chair because stability matters. You really don't want to take turns being chairs. If you should happen to create a subcommittee or a committee that is an offshoot of your board or commission or association, then yes, you can assign a chair to perform those functions within that subcommittee. It could be the chair of your board itself, but when you're having your main meetings and of your board or association, you really want to elect a long-term meeting manager that will serve a predetermined term, so to speak, because stability matters. You don't want to take turns being chairs, even though that might seem to be participatory, inclusive, whatever the case might be, because your chair will develop skills and their credibility through the experience of going through each meeting and having that time with you and going through these procedures we're about to talk about, that we're going to talk about a little bit later, that are more nuanced. So you want to have a stable chair. And then as a member of the board, how do you support that chair? You follow the leader. Sometimes it can be tempting to nitpick or to maybe, if there's any issues within the board itself, to maybe not demonstrate full respect for the chair's authority. But if there's ways, and we'll talk about that in the hold accountable session, to hold your chair accountable that are professional. There are within the scope of Robert's rules. But a thing that's very important is after you select your chair, because you found the right one, is to demonstrate your respect for your chair's authority every chance you get. And one of the best ways you can do that is to make it easy for the chair by being great. Learn the rules yourself. Be prepared in advance. Understand what types of motions would be commonly made in your type of association, board, or commission. Look at past issues and see what worked and didn't work. Know what's on the agenda for that day. Try not to be repetitive. We'll talk later about best practices that you can do, but simply make it easy for your chair to be great by you yourself being great, so that the chair doesn't really need to skew too far and can really focus in on what they came to do that day. And if they're not doing great for whatever reason, a great way to support somebody in any situation, quite frankly, is to hold them accountable. Hold your chair accountable. How can you do that? There's two different ways. One is kind of very official, by making appropriate procedural corrections. If something is occurring during a meeting and you feel like it's not according to procedure, whether it's procedures that are in Roberts itself, they're in your bylaws or rules that you have adopted, you can call a point of order. And then that's the chair's job now then to rule on that point of order and decide whether or not there's been a violation of procedure. If you don't agree with the chair's ruling, then you can appeal the chair's ruling, because that's one of the great things about Robert's rules and how it applies to boards and commissions is that though the chair is the presiding officer of the meeting, the chair can be overruled by the rest of the board if the board feels that the chair has made an improper ruling. So make points of order when other members or perhaps the chair has made a ruling or a decision or something that you feel is not in conformance and in alignment with your rules of procedure, Robert's rules of procedure, your bylaws that you've adopted. Also ask for parliamentary inquiries. If you're unsure of where you're at in a meeting or why something's happening, the chair should know. That's the chair's job. So ask the chair where we're at, what motion's on the floor. How does this motion work? How many votes does this motion require to be adopted? Hold the chair accountable by asking those questions. And then as far as what your expectations for a chair should be in holding them accountable is that as a chair, you've been assigned this very important duty to being the meeting manager, which is quite frankly probably the most important job in the room if you want to conduct a successful, clean, concise business meeting, is that as chair, you need to do your homework, okay? This is a very important job. You need to understand more than anybody else, as much as possible, what your rules are if you've adopted them. What parts of this big book do you really need to focus on in order to get through the meeting appropriately and do your job correctly? Do your homework. And then when you show up, bring your A game as chair. Be prepared, bring your A game. But most importantly, I think we can all know this in whatever experience we've gone through, whether it be occupational, parenting, being a partner to somebody else, being a brother, a father, mother, or sister. None of us no one started perfect and no one's ever going to be perfect. But the key is when you don't get something right, when it's brought to your attention, or at least you know something wasn't as good as it could be, get better. I mean, that's really a fundamental thing that we don't often think about too much, but get better at your job as you move on. Look, remember we talked about earlier on that, it takes time for a chair to really become good at their job. You would expect a chair to be better in their 10th meeting than their first. It makes a lot of sense. Even if they are very prepared for that first meeting, they do all their homework, they're still going to need opportunities to get better. So those should be your expectations of your chair. And that's what a chair should do when they accept that role, even somewhat begrudgingly, which we'll talk about now, because here are your desired qualities in a chair. A chair should always be prepared and organized. And if you know somebody that's like that, generally, that's a good start. A chair should be decisive. Chair needs to be decisive. Shouldn't be a lot of fluctuations. I'm not sure. It doesn't mean that they have like dictator qualities necessarily. It just means they're confident when they make decisions. Maybe this one should have been first about being impartial, obviously. That's critical to being a chair. Because when we're talking about being a member of a board, it's like you can be in the minority group, so to speak, a majority group, or you could be a singular person that just tends to kind of go your own way all the time, but you need to have the same opportunities and same, again, to participate. And the chair, when the chair makes rulings when things come up, if that should be the case, the chair needs to be impartial. So again, that is a critical component, is kind of having that neutrality, if you will. And that gains credibility almost as much or more than your knowledge of rules or the agenda items or things in front of you. And this is kind of a funny one here too, but oftentimes your chair should be sincerely semi-reluctant to be the chair. Sometimes a person that raises their hand first, very excited to take on this role, perhaps is not the best person for the job. But if you can't find anybody else, maybe that is the person. But I've often seen that the best persons for the job to be the chair or your meeting manager is somebody that isn't that enthusiastic about doing it. But that person should be an affable leader, meaning simply likable, personable, some levity about them, a sense of humor that doesn't overtake a meeting, but is there when necessary to be deployed. And they should have demonstrated leadership qualities, because that's what they are. A chair is your leader. A chair should be somebody that values that credibility and how important it is. And again, what is integrity to me in a business meeting setting where you are, again, it's not somebody that's an executive making a decision, but it's a group of people making a decision. And, what does integrity mean? It's somebody that values process over outcome. Process of how you get there and how we got there, and feeling good about we did things the right way and everybody had an opportunity to participate. The motions were clean. The discussion was robust, but it wasn't too long. We stayed on topic. We called a vote. We announced the vote. It's over. As chair, maybe I don't like the outcome, but I'm thrilled with how we got there because we were professional, we were fair, and we did things by the book. Which then leads us into what can the chair do and not do? The chair can express their perspective just prior to the vote, because what you don't want, again, in the second half, is the chair active in deliberations. So if you have a full discussion, you're just about to take the vote, the chair can then just, it can be for persuasion, but just an opportunity to articulate why they're going to vote a certain way. That's only fair, especially if something is not, unanimous in that nature, or it's, it's a little bit controversial, if you will. Chair always deserves an opportunity to express her perspective just before the vote, but that should not reinvigorate discussion. Chair's expressed the opinion, calls for the vote, takes the vote. Of course, the chair can vote and should be able to vote. And the chair can, again, we talked about it before, be overruled by the majority, which is another beautiful component of Roberts. Again, the chair is not an executive in the sense that, they can't veto things necessarily entirely. They don't necessarily always have the final word. They're there to perform a service for the board, not to tell the board what happens or how to do things. And again, I want to point out that a lot of these, if you want to call it concepts, rules, or things of that nature, they may not be entirely true for all types of boards. Smaller boards allow, again, when we say here, what the chair can't do is make or second motions. In some smaller boards, as I call them, societies, chairs can make or second motions. But what I'm offering you again today is what I think to be, if at all possible, things to avoid. If you can't, so be it. But these are best practices. So what can a chair or your meeting manager not do is to make or second motions. Why? Because again, you want to have that level of neutrality and impartiality. That's just part of it. So it relies upon another board member to make a motion, and then a secondary board member or a different board member to second that motion. Again, very important for neutrality and impartiality and being a solid professional meeting manager, that the chair does not actively participate in the deliberations. The chair monitors the deliberations. The chair tells people when it's their turn to speak and gives them the floor. The chair determines when it's somebody's turn to speak is over. The chair determines whether or not a motion is viable. So in order to be able to do those things effectively with credibility, the chair does not participate in the deliberations actively. And again, the chair cannot override the majority in most instances, and that's important to note. So Now that we've gone through those things, these are the things that you should always do. And then we're going to talk about things you should never do. And I just put them all on one list here, and I'll go into the nuances of each as best as I can, try to get some examples. As a board, homeowners association, commission, committee, always make clean motions with clear and desired outcomes. It may be, when I say clear and desired outcomes, if you don't want something to happen, I don't recommend making an emotion in the negative. Motion should always be in the affirmative, where a yes vote will result in an outcome that is desired by the person making the motion. So if you don't feel that way, don't make a motion. Wait for somebody else to do it, speak against it, vote against it. But making a motion not to go into a contract with so-and-so is not really the best way to do things. So what you always want to do is make clean motions with clear and desired outcomes. That takes some practice. The chair can help with that, again, by doing their homework. So if a member makes a motion that is not entirely clear, the chair can then restate that motion in a way that hopefully will present clarity on that motion and simplicity and make it more succinct. That's totally allowable. And then hopefully by doing so, what you get is understanding amongst all membership. What are we actually considering right now? What is on the floor? Because if you have any sense as a chair or another member that there is a misunderstanding, or one person in a group feels like this is what we're trying to do and another person in a group disagrees, then you don't have a good motion. And probably the best thing to do is withdraw that motion and try again. Another important thing to always do is to wait your turn. That's a critical thing in a board member society association, is then the chair, again, as meeting manager, grants you the floor, so to speak, when it's your turn. So somebody's done, they yield the floor, you request to speak in whatever manner how you do it. If you have technology, great. If you raise your hand, if you just kind of give them the old smile, I'd like to speak now. You have to be recognized by the chair, then you wait your turn. And then it's your turn, I should say, to then go ahead and speak. There are exceptions to this, of course, where you don't wait your turn, which you talked a little bit earlier about, like calling a point of order, if you will. If you're in the middle of your deliberations, if you're in the middle of a motion and you're talking about whether or not to do something, and you feel like there's a rule that's been violated or something procedurally is awry, so to speak, you don't wait to seek the chair's permission to speak, because it'll be too late to try to cure that issue if in fact it is a problem. So at that point, you do interject and you don't wait your turn, but that is a rarity. Otherwise, what allows for clean, clear, proper business meetings to run appropriately is that one person is speaking at a time and you wait your turn. And again, another important thing about that to do is to just to ensure that you're not having conversations. You really want to make sure you're having, conversations. I'm not having conversations, but you're having deliberations as to discussions. We'll talk about that in the never part. Always keep it about the business that's at hand. This can be a hard one, and I understand, especially if you're dealing with something that has some emotional components to it. But you always want to keep your discussion, it's not your discussion, but your deliberations, business-oriented and not personal. Believe it or not, Roberts actually tells us, I paraphrase, that somebody's motives for why they want something to happen or the board to adopt something are irrelevant, quite frankly, to a certain degree. They can share what their perspectives are and again, what their motivations are. But as another member, it's not appropriate to ascribe motives to them or to say, or to again, to focus on the motives rather than the topic at hand. It should always be about business. It should never be personal. That keeps things clean. That keeps it a proper business meeting. You should always, in your deliberations, be brief. It's hard. You should always have a time limit, of course, too, established in your rules as how long somebody can speak. I would never think, it's never a good idea to keep it open-ended, in my opinion. So there's a motion on the floor. Chair usually goes to the first person that makes the motion to say, Mrs. or Miss So-and-so, you've made the motion, you have the floor. you should have X amount of minutes or a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever to state your case, then it's somebody else's turn. But you don't need to use all that time. You don't have to use it all. In my experience, brevity and succinctness is far more persuasive and resonates more than somebody that is determined to use all of that time to speak. So you want to honor speaking restrictions, but most importantly, honor other people's time. Not just the other people that you're on the board or commission with, but whoever else is there. The public, the stakeholders, people that are interested, people that are watching from wherever they may be afar. Of course, you always want to be present and engaged. That should go without saying, but believe it or not, can be problematic at times. So stay focused on why you're there and what you're doing. You should be, of course, be aware of what other people are saying. You don't want to ask the same questions as other people or bring up the same points. So stay present and engaged. And a very important thing to do, of course, in that vein is to always stay on topic. And then Roberts used the words germane. If your deliberations, if your points of persuasion, if your perspective is not germane to the motion on the floor, it should not be allowed. And what determines that? This is like a bit of synchronicity. You start with your agenda, right, that you've created, that we talked about before, that's clear on what you're about to do today, your roadmap, again, to success, right? That agenda then determines what types of proper, clear, succinct motions that you can make. And that motion then that you make becomes the parameters for discussion and deliberation. So if your deliberations aren't germane to the motion, they're not appropriate. They're not valued. They're not helpful. A lot of this can sound very rigid, and quite frankly, it kind of is. Because when you have some of your best meetings, there should be maybe just some moments again of levity. And we all operate, if you're in Hawaii, with aloha. We always do, until it's like either unearned or thrown away by somebody else. But really, a really good board meeting, I'm not going to say it's dry, or but it should be kind of clinical, to be frank. Again, with moments of humanity, but most of it should be pretty clinical. So when you walk away at the end, like, oh wow, yeah, we're done. Now, wow, that was very, it's systematic, it's procedural, and a very important part of that, again, is by staying on topic, staying focused on what you're there for, not straying, not taking too many liberties, if you will, in your discussions. Maybe an anecdote might help, but perhaps more often than not, that's more personal and self-indulgent. So just try to stay topic, stay business-oriented, and stay focused and succinct and brief. Always, your chair should always restate the motion before the vote is called. Hey, make sure we're all still on the same page here. Who knows? Maybe these deliberations extended on for an extenuated period of time, and we maybe you don't want to presume everybody there still remembers what the motion is. But restating the motion before the vote is critical and required by Roberts as a procedural aspect. And then more importantly, or not more importantly, but as important, after the vote is called and it's determined how many ayes and noes you have, the chair then states what the outcome is. Okay? Motion to do so-and-so is adopted, is hereby adopted. That is what makes the matter final, is the chair restating stating what the outcome of the vote is, puts closure on that agenda item. Always accept outcomes. That can be hard to do sometimes. And no one's a robot. We don't want robots that don't have feelings or AI generated people on our boards and commissions. And oftentimes we go into things that are, we feel like there can be winners and losers, so to speak. And that's life. So it's critical to accept outcomes. The exception to accepting an outcome is called reconsideration. And reconsideration is a viable way to go back into something, to revisit something, and to take it up again. Roberts generally states that reconsideration can only be done during the same meeting. So once you adjourn, it's probably not likely that you're going to be able to reconsider something you've already decided before, because we got to move on. You have to move on to new things and other things. You can't keep going over the same things over and over again. I don't think that's appreciated by anybody that relies upon you to do the work you're doing. But some agency or groups or boards allow for reconsideration at the very next meeting that can be brought up. So that's an opportunity to revisit something. But the key to reconsideration is, and what makes a lot of sense and why, one of the reasons why I love Roberts, because it just makes sense, is things can only be reconsidered if a person who voted on the prevailing side makes the motion for reconsideration. So if there was a vote to enter into a contract with Corporation X for the following purposes at the following rates, and that vote failed, and you voted against it, you prevailed. You could make a motion to reconsider it, and anybody else can second it. Even somebody who voted for it is like, oh, good, I'm glad in this opportunity. Anybody can second the motion, but only a person on the prevailing side, meaning the side that had more votes than the other, can make a motion for reconsideration. This is not an uncommon thing. Sometimes after it's a little bit of thought, just kind of rethinking things, evaluating things, like maybe we're a bit hasty. Maybe we didn't consider things fully. That is an opportunity to revisit things that have been quote unquote decided. But again, the critical component to that is it can only be considered or brought forward by a member who was on the prevailing side. Because imagine if anybody can make a motion of reconsideration. Then we're not moving forward. We're allowing for people, it's just part of the deal. Again, it's not I don't want you to think of it as winners and losers, but on any individual issue, there's going to be a majority and minority, unless it's unanimous. And that's okay. But if you're in the minority on an issue, in the sense that you voted with the minority, you have less rights moving forward on that, including the ability to make a motion for reconsideration. But other than that motion, always accept outcomes. It's part of the process. Always take careful notes to produce accurate, complete minutes. Is this a procedural thing? Yeah, it is. How important are minutes? Oftentimes, even though things are recorded on Zoom, or maybe we're recording with another device or something of that nature, your minutes that then become an item on your next agenda that then are adopted by your board, it should include in there, this was the agenda item. This was the vote result on it, and who voted how, and how you got there. And then that's what makes something sometimes official and couldn't matter down the road. If there's any dispute or any uncertainty as to outcomes, your minutes become crucial. Just as a unofficial instrument for the board to be aware of something and to make its shareholders, stakeholders, or the people that it serves aware of something. But it could be critical when it comes to judicial scrutiny, looking over something that, who knows, may end up in litigation. So always take careful notes to produce accurate, complete minutes. And again, this is critical. We're not talking about executives making decisions. We're talking about groups of people getting together to accomplish something. So always remember that you, whatever your role is, are part of a whole, a collective, working to accomplish something together. Those are the things you should always do. Now, finally, on to our fourth item, things you should never do. Again, some smaller societies or different types of boards, maybe even your bylaws or your rules that you've adopted your board may differ from these things. Understood. If that's the case, no problem. But these are the things that generally are best practices. And Roberts says, don't do these things. You should never consider a motion unless there's a second. If you can't get support from somebody else on the board to second a motion, there really doesn't seem much point in using people's time to deliberate and then vote on that motion. It's debatable, so to speak, whether or not you should make a motion out of sympathy or just allowing a person the opportunity to, express why they think something's important. You don't necessarily have to fully support a motion to second it, but doing so out of empathy perhaps isn't the best thing to do, but it's not the worst thing to do. Again, there is some humanity involved in this, but generally, you should not consider a motion unless there's a second. A second shows at least minimal support for something so that it merits your time and consideration. You should never consider two main motions at the same time. What are we doing? We got one set of train tracks. We're on this train. We're headed toward our destination. We don't need two trains. We might derail. We might intersect. We might hit each other. So if somebody makes a motion, and as a member, you don't care for that motion, you speak against it, or even as a member, you make a motion, you don't even like it anymore for whatever reason after you learn more, dispose of that main motion first. And there's two ways to really cleanly dispose of a motion are to either vote it down, which is fine and not always a bad thing and shouldn't be seen as something that's negative, or to withdraw your motion. The maker has a right to withdraw that motion and doesn't require permission generally from the board or committee to say, okay, I'm withdrawing my motion. And you also don't require the permission of the person that seconded your motion to withdraw your motion. The difference between those two things is if you vote a motion down, that often means that you can't bring that motion up again, because doing so just doesn't make sense. It goes back to making sense. If you vote a motion down, bringing it up again, it's repetitive. What Roberts really likes is moving forward. There's very little backwards minus reconsideration and renewal of motions, and there's some sidewards things, but Roberts likes forwards. So if a motion has been decided either way, the affirmative or negative, but especially in the negative, you really don't want to bring it up again. We've been there, we've done that. So if you vote a motion down, there is some concern that, hey, if we want to revisit this later, we may not be able to. So it might be better to withdraw your motion to preserve its viability for a later day. Another thing in my opinion, sometimes it's allowed, and even in certain legislatures it's allowed, and in lawmaking bodies, but I generally don't think it's a great idea, even though Roberts is okay with it, is to abstain from voting. You're there for a reason. You wanted to be on the board, the committee, the association. You were either elected to be there or put in place there through proper procedures. Vote on things. Vote yes, vote no. If you can't vote because there's a conflict of interest or something else that precludes you from voting, you can recuse yourself. And you should recuse yourself at times if there's a conflict of interest. You should not vote. And you would state why, and then you get permission from the chair to recuse yourself, and then you're excused from voting. But abstaining from voting is not really a healthy practice. It can create a precedent where board members then just decline to take a position because it's too difficult to do so. Again, if that's allowed in your bylaws, fine. I'm just more of the mind of keep things simple. There's a motion on the floor. It's time to vote up or down. Don't ever speak against your own motion. Don't make a motion and talk against it. You made the wrong motion. You should have made the opposite motion. Oddly, not oddly, but you can vote against your own motion. Because just because you make a motion doesn't mean you're then tied to it to then later on vote yes. That wouldn't make any sense, because you could be persuaded otherwise. That's what deliberations are for, right? They're for you as any member to listen to other members' perspectives through proper procedure, and then when it comes time to vote, to cast your vote. So you don't have to vote for your own main motion, but you're not allowed to speak against your own motion. Something else we talked about earlier, so I won't go too long about it, is you're there to deliberate on things, not have a discussion, which means then one person speaking at a time, waiting your turn, observing time limits, getting permission from the chair to speak other than when you're calling a point of order, and not having members. It's okay occasionally for a member to ask a question of another member for clarification, to ensure that they heard exactly what they heard, or for some context, if you will. But you should throw through the chair. Madam Chair, can you please ask member so-and-so if they're referring to the festival of 2022 or 2023? I wasn't quite clear. Or is member X really, are they saying this or that? Now, understood at times, it might be easier just to allow two members to have a brief exchange, fine. But if you're having frequent exchanges between two members, now we're having a conversation. Now we're having a conversation and a discussion. And that's not really in the best interest of everybody there. So deliberate, don't discuss. Of course, don't ever operate without a quorum. It seems, obvious, but that's generally, a simple rule. Make sure you have a quorum. If you don't have a quorum, there's some things you can do to open a meeting to recess to another time, obviously, so that you can take care of business when you do have a quorum. But there are very limited things. You could probably take testimony, but I wouldn't, because if you don't have a quorum, then you didn't have a sufficient number of members there to really appreciate that testimony. And if I'm there to share my input, I want to have at least a minimal amount of the members on the board there to hear me speak. So don't operate without a quorum. This is important too procedurally as a chair or a board. Don't declare an outcome without the required amount of votes, because different things, different motions might have different minimal vote requirements. Some motions just require a simple majority of the membership. So if you got 9, it just takes 5. If 5 of your 9 members there, 4-3 doesn't do anything. 3-2 doesn't do anything. It's got to be 5-0. Some motions just require a majority of the members present. So if you have 5 members there, 4-1 is just fine. But those types of motions that requires the majority of members present. Those are generally just for procedural things that don't affect anything other than the board's business itself, to be fair. Some motions and some aspects of what the work you do is going to require a supermajority of membership rather than a simple majority. So again, if those things, you have to be aware of the motion on the floor and what its vote requirements are. And you should state that as a chair before the vote's called so people know. And of course, you should know it after the vote's called and the votes are tallied. How many votes did I need? How many votes did we need? And make sure you got that right. And something that's important to note that I've seen not really work out before is that, a tie vote is a real vote. It means the motion didn't pass generally. If you have 8 members out of 9 there and something's 4-4, it's like, oh, it's undecided. No, it was decided. You didn't get the 5 you needed. That is a conclusion. That is conclusive. It is decisive, and it is clear. You shouldn't resolve a tie vote by, resolving the issue, bringing it up again when that other member's there, or having somebody recuse themselves or something else to resolve a tie vote. You just had a vote. It's clear. The motion was lost. Another thing to do is once the vote, after you voted and the vote's done, is you don't explain your vote. Call for the vote. Okay, if you're doing a roll call, member so-and-so, aye, and here's no. It's yes or no. Don't explain your vote after your vote or during your vote. Another critical thing that the chair is responsible for mostly, but gets help from membership and others, is don't give up control of the room. You want people, whatever their role is, if they're not part of your membership, there to help you. If it's that kind of a meeting where you have stakeholders, shareholders, association members, members of the public, because you're doing rulemaking or something, you want them there to help you. They should always feel welcome, but there's proper parameters. It's your room. It's your responsibility to make sure things are done correctly that day, and that everybody's behaving accordingly, and everybody knows we're at a business meeting. Don't ever give up control of the room. If you have a time limit on testimony, it can be hard sometimes to tell somebody your time's up, especially if maybe they're an older person and their testimony is emotional. But you should really be careful about extending courtesies to others that you wouldn't extend to somebody else. Don't give up control of the room. Make sure that that rules are observed, and that, again, everything's being done in an official capacity. Again, everybody feels welcome. Everybody feels aloha, but we're doing things a certain way. And we run a tight ship. That's critical. Never disregard the rights of the individual or minority. There are things within Roberts where the minority or individual can't control a conversation. Chair can call for a vote. If there's nobody left to talk, you can't keep going on and on and on. Again, if you're just one person and you make a motion, there's no second, then maybe you don't get your chance to speak. That being said, Roberts carves out provisions to make sure that the minority or individual have those rights, because again, in the board, Roberts recognizes the board as a whole, the majority, the minority, the individual, and all of those things combined in some way, shape, or form. Everybody has meaning, everybody has relevance, and everybody has proper opportunities. And then last, it's just conversely what we said about what to always do is to never forget that you're a part of a whole. When you're part of a board, when you're part of a group, when you're a member of something, you're one part of that. You're part of a collective, and to be your best, do your best at your job, and to remember that your peers, and that you're there to accomplish something together. And that's it. That's all I got. I hope that was helpful. That was like pretty much almost an hour. Didn't time it. Feel pretty good about that. So yeah, that's pretty organized and a nice example of how to do something in a timely manner. I'll just say thank you again for sharing your time with me. And I hope that you got 2 or 3 things, or maybe more, hopefully, that you can take out of this to help you as you move forward, whatever your role is. If you're the chair, if you're a member of a board or commission or association, if you're a regular attendee of meetings and you participate in them, what you should expect to see when you're as a participant, when you come to a meeting, what you should expect out of the board or commission or group that you're there to help, and you're there to participate with and observe. Those are the things you should expect. So again, thank you so much for your time and choosing to spend it with us today. And thank you, Shelby, and thank you, Julie, for this opportunity. And if there are any questions, I'll do my best to avoid them with diplomacy.
Yes, we do have a question, John, from another
Okay.
John. John, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask the question.
Sorry.
All right. Well, John asks, can non-members suggest
I was having
agenda
trouble
items?
finding my icon there. Yeah,
You're
my
there.
question
We can
was
hear you.
just,
Perfect.
so can only members of the board suggest agenda items for the future, or what about, people in the audience? Because sunshine laws, your meetings are open to anybody. So if somebody throws out an item, it's not listed on the agenda, you can't discuss it, but can that be brought up for the next meeting?
That's a great question. I contemplated talking about like who decides what's on an agenda and how to do it. I was like, oh, I'm going to run out of time. So thank you for asking that. So generally, your chair will be ultimately determine what's on the agenda. You can have a portion of your meeting on your agenda that it's not really like for like free open forum, but it's items to come up for the next meeting. So you can get some sense without going into deliberations, without going into whether they're great ideas or not, because we're not ready for that, about what the board or group or association wants to see for their next meeting. If you would like to, if it's that kind of a situation where you'd like to entertain ideas from people that have come to attend, completely appropriate. It's what you're willing to quote unquote tolerate. I don't mean that in the sense of, like tolerate where it feels hard. It just means like how much time you have. And if you believe that would be a healthy thing to do, to ask members of the group, like, what do you want us to take up? I don't see that as a problem at all. I think that's being inclusive. And if you're in a situation where, that's really where your ideas should come from, is your membership, I think that's a really good idea. Another way to get agenda items is, from the memberships, the members themselves would propose items to the chair in between meetings through whatever means of communication that are, fair and equivalent, where it's equitable for all members. And you want to be careful about, don't do like group chats or emails, because then again, you're getting in, you might start getting into, actual deliberations unintentionally in between meetings when you're deciding those items, but it should be more individual. But it's a good question, John. Thanks for bringing it up. It's really up to your board of commission if you want to do that. How you want to determine what items, if they're not already predetermined, because some things are, depending on your board of commission, like these are things we always do every year. But if there's if there's kind of openness to what the board or commission can take up, then I don't see a problem with opening it up to the if you want to talk about not the audience, but the participants that are on the board to make suggestions.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have any other questions, feel free to unmute yourself or pop something in the chat box. We do have a question. Let's see. Not yet. All right. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask John.
Okay, John, I have just one more. Because of COVID, we started getting used to having Zoom meetings. And so they can become very, very large. Anything different about conducting a meeting using Robert's rules when it's a Zoom meeting with now 30 people instead of the usual 10?
If you're a sunshine board, then the difference is if you do a Zoom meeting, you're required to allow people to testify by Zoom. And also, if your connection goes down and you're not able to, reconnect within a certain amount of time, I think it's half an hour, then you have to cancel the meeting. So those are if you're a sunshine law board. But when it comes to the procedural things we talked about today, nothing changes there. And again, John, thank you. You're great at prompting me because something I wanted to bring up, and remember I talked about this. I like vinyl records. I like, so I describe myself as a troglodyte in some ways, just to hyperbole. I'm not totally a caveman. Thank God Shelby helped me today to figure out how to even share a screen. I'm just junk at this kind of stuff. I wish we were all in a room together now. I mean, I know that's impractical. Maybe some of you aren't on the same island. Maybe you're far away on this island. Maybe you're in another state. I don't know. But I would have enjoyed having all of us together today to experience this together. And, I've seen where I've seen some meetings go really awry and where procedure not being applied. I think one of the reasons is because it's by Zoom. And it's hard for people to understand what's going on. They get disengaged, they get disconnected, and that's understandable. And maybe they also don't treat each other as well as they should because they're not in the same room, and things get lost. So that's going to sound, I know that's impractical. So I understand that. I'm just advocating for if you have a choice, and it's not a matter of convenience to get together in the same room, and things will go better. So, but nothing changed. The procedurally, what we talked about today, things don't change. I think they just get harder and more difficult for the chair to monitor, and for the members to participate when it's done by Zoom or any other version of that product.
I'm part of the Executive Office on Aging, and one of the problems is that people who are not really familiar with Roberts always want to add new items to the discussion, and it's not on the agenda. And they feel kind of insulted that, oh, you're not letting me talk. So how is this really an open meeting?
Well, that's the thing. That's a good point. If you're at the Office of Aging, it's likely or possible that you're subject to the sunshine law. So we'll go back to once your agenda is set, you can only add items per law if it's an emergency. And this kind of contradicts itself, but it's an emergency, and the item itself, if approved, would not affect the masses because they didn't have advance notice. And then you need a 2/3 vote of the membership to add that item. What that's all telling you is that don't add items. So yeah, I mean, that's, again, we talked about establishing that agenda for clear parameters about, what you're there to do today, and maybe more importantly, what you're not there to do, which then hopefully provides you guys with the confidence to say, hey, understood, sounds good, give me a call. Maybe we can add it to our next meeting so we can properly agendize it. But for today, we're not here for that. And again, it can seem a little rough at times, but with diplomacy and warmth and some levity, you have to, again, retain control of the room. Don't give it up.
Okay, Elise, if you'd like to ask your question, feel free.
Sure, and I apologize if you hear my toddler in the background, but I'm just wondering if you had a general recommendation for how far in advance to send out an agenda before a board meeting, and if you have any suggestions on making sure your board actually looks at it before the board meeting.
Well, we talked about that, doing your homework, especially as a chair, but as a member, that's your job. And you can tell when people don't. There's not really any way to discipline. But if you have a chair that is not looking at it, then you need a new chair. I mean, that's one of the requirements. Members talk about doing their homework and being prepared and being organized and being that guy, so to speak. No emphasis on guy gender-wise, but I'm that guy, right? But as far as timing-wise, if you're a board or commission or whatever it is subject to the sunshine law, then you have to do so 6 days, 6 calendar days in advance of the meeting minimally. You don't have a requirement for, how far out you could set it, but it has to be at least 6 days before. If you don't have rules, we can kind of talk about this. You should adopt a basic set of rules for your board or committee or association that would set those things out in there. So there's not a lot of discretion for that if it's not required by law. So I can give you an example. Some of our boards and commissions here at the county, they know well in advance what they want to discuss at a certain meeting. They'll post their agendas maybe even like 20 calendar days before the meeting, or even longer. Or like for us at the council, we take it to the wire. We take it to the 7th or 6th day because we need that time for us to properly process documents and make sure that everything's in alignment. So ours are that 6th day, but I would say at least a week. If you don't have any rules, at least a week. It gives time. I know in this day and age, things travel at light speed information, but we don't want to presume somebody sees something. And then it gives people time to decide whether or not they care. And if they care, it gives them time to just do some research and determine if they want to participate, if they want to send in written testimony, just call somebody on the board and say, hey, this is how I feel. We've known each other for a long time, all those kind of things. So my recommendation is at least a week. And it better be 6 days if you're a board that's subject to sunshine law, because if it's not, then the meeting is not valid. It should be canceled.
And sorry if this is a dumb question, but how do you know if your board is subject to the sunshine law? Like, would you know if you are?
Yeah, if you look at Chapter 92, it tells you basically it's boards that are essentially county or state, mostly, county or state boards that are established through the state or the county are going to be those. Some advisory groups are not, because they don't make final decisions, but they tend to follow too, just to be safe, just to be certain. So if you're not bound by the sunshine law, you probably have rules in your bylaws or your meeting rules, hopefully, that would state when agenda needs to be posted by. But I just would say, if it's not going to be a week, at least 3 or 4 days to give people time to prepare. Yeah, especially if there's complicated or complex, I should say, or even complicated and complex items that you're going to have to be taking up that would require people time to determine, even to change plans. If you know when the meeting date is, okay, fine, I can schedule for that. But sometimes people don't even know the meeting date until the agenda comes out if you don't have prescribed meeting dates. So giving time for preparation is critical.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we will wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Jon, for a wonderful and very informative presentation. As a reminder, please just take a few minutes to fill out our short online survey. The link is in the chat. This greatly helps with our grant funding for this free series. And be also sure to check your email in the next coming days for the slides that you saw today, as well as the video link recording and that survey link once more. So mahalo, and we will see you all next month.
Ahui o.